On a bright, calm morning on June 24, 1967, the sky above the Yorkshire Dales was clear, the sun warm against the rolling green hills, and the air held none of the tension that would later grip the region. To those venturing into the wilderness that day, it was a perfect Saturday, a day for exploration, for challenge, for the thrill of descent into the underworld. It was a day that promised adventure, but that promise, so full of excitement and purpose, would turn in mere hours to tragedy, sudden, shocking, and irreversible. The entrance to Mossdale Caverns lies at the base of Mossdale Scar, a cliff formation on the eastern flank of Wharfdale, not far from the market town of Grassington. Hidden in the earth, shrouded in limestone and shadow, the cave system stretches for miles, narrow and winding, often flooded and unforgiving. Formed in the middle limestone of the Yoredale series, the caverns hold a rushing underground stream that resurfaces at Black Keld, over 4 kilometers away and 225 meters below. The cave is long, complex, and deadly. But to a caver, especially a young one full of spirit, danger was a part of the draw. The man who first unveiled Mossdale's secret depths was Bob Leakey, a name etched into British speleological history. Back in 1941, while searching for a dropped tobacco pipe near Mossdale Scar, Leakey found what he had long suspected: the entrance to a vast, unexplored system. With wartime limiting manpower, he enlisted young women from a local aircraft factory to aid in exploration. Leakey's ventures were often solo, grueling tests of stamina and courage, and while many turned back, unable or unwilling to push through the cold water crawls and body-tight squeezes, Leakey endured. Yet, even he warned, Mossdale was unforgiving. The passages were prone to flash flooding. The journey to the farthest chamber could take 8 to 10 hours, with no easy exit. Once deep inside, by 1964, a new generation of cavers, Mike Boone and Pete Livesey, became the first to reach the far end of the system since Leakey. Their success rekindled public and academic interest in Mossdale. It became a magnet once more for those drawn to the frontier of Britain's underground geography. It was, for many, the last great mystery of English caving. Among those intrigued was a dedicated group from the University of Leeds Speleological Association, ULSA. And on that fateful summer day in 1967, 10 cavers set out to continue the exploration of Mossdale. There were 2 groups. Group 1, composed of 6 experienced young men, had a clear goal: to reach the far end of the system and use explosives to clear a barrier that had long frustrated further access. This group included Dave Adamson, the team leader, Jeff, Bill, John, Michael, and Colin. They entered the cave first. Group 2 followed shortly behind. They consisted of Jim, John Collettis, and Morag Forbes, the fiancé of Dave Adamson. This second team planned only a brief excursion to Rough Chamber, a point approximately 40 minutes into the cave. They would then return and wait at the surface for the main party to emerge later in the day. The morning sun shone without menace. It was dry, almost idyllic, the kind of weather that disarms and comforts, luring one into a false sense of permanence. Yet within hours, that calm would be shattered. As the 2 groups made their way underground, Jim from the second team would later describe the experience as miserable, not necessarily due to technical challenge, but for its physical and mental endurance. It was a wet, narrow, monotonous cave, all crawling, no grand chambers, easily flooded, and with little visual payoff. It was, as he said, all the nastiest things about caves. The walls were slick with condensation, cold to the touch, and the echo of running water never stopped, a sound that should have soothed but instead unsettled. Each breath drew in damp air laced with minerals and silence. The ground was never dry, boots slipped, knees pressed into cold stone, helmets scraped against jagged ceilings, leaving sparks in the darkness. Communication was minimal, muffled voices echoing down tight corridors, often lost in the churn of underground streams. Even headlamps, their only light, gave off a weak halo that barely pushed back the void. The passages seemed to shift in the mind, repetitive, claustrophobic, like crawling through an endless, dripping throat of the earth. Time didn't pass underground in any normal way. Minutes stretched, Every section felt identical to the last. There was no sky, no horizon, no wind, just relentless rock and the constant press of weight above. For every forward push, fatigue doubled. Muscles ached not from exertion alone, but from tension, from bracing against the unknown. And despite being surrounded by teammates, there was a sense of isolation, as if the cave swallowed not only sound, but companionship. Every movement forward was a quiet question. What waits ahead? The deeper they went, the more the cave seemed to change, not physically, but atmospherically. It was alive in its own way, indifferent, waiting, and though no one would admit it aloud, there was fear, not panic, but a gnawing unease that something might go wrong, that maybe today was the day when nature would close her mouth. By the time Morag and her group emerged from Rough Chamber and returned to the surface around 5 p.m., the weather had shifted. It was raining. What began as light, steady drops soon transformed into something darker, heavier, as the clouds thickened and the skies began to empty themselves over the Mossdale Valley. Morag, concerned, mentioned to Jim her worry for Dave and the others still inside. They returned to the shooting hut, a shelter roughly 30 minutes from the cave entrance, to wait out the storm. But the rain didn't stop, it only worsened. Jim and the others eventually left for home, but Morag stayed alone, waiting for Dave. As the hours passed and night approached, her anxiety grew. By 7:30 p.m., she returned to the cave entrance, only to find nothing unusual. Yet something didn't sit right. She walked back to the hut, but by 8 p.m., there was still no sign of the six. Morag paced outside, her boots crunching damp gravel, head tilted toward the darkening sky. The drizzle had turned to steady rain, and the wind carried a chill that hadn't been there earlier. The stillness around Mossdale felt wrong, unnaturally quiet, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Her thoughts began to loop. Had they come back and taken another path? Had she missed them? What if they were just delayed? She replayed their last conversation, Dave smiling before he disappeared into the earth, his voice echoing in her mind. She stared at the narrow trail leading back to the scar, squinting through rain and mist, hoping for headlamps, for shadows moving, for anything. But the hillside remained empty. Inside the hut, she lit a small gas lamp and waited, fingers trembling, watching the flame flutter. Every drop of water hitting the windows felt louder now, heavier, like time was dripping away. Her tea went cold, her hands felt colder, and still no one came. Outside, the rain had become relentless, soaking the hills, feeding the stream beds. She opened the door and listened to the distant bleat of sheep, to the silence that screamed between every sound. Something was wrong, deeply, unmistakably wrong, the kind of wrong that lives in your stomach before it reaches your mind. She stood up, grabbed her coat, and stepped into the rain again, her heart pounding harder with every step toward the cave. She didn't know what she would find, but she knew with sickening certainty that something had changed. So she returned to the entrance again. This time, what she saw would change everything. The entrance was gone, submerged, flooded. Mossdale Beck, swollen from the relentless rainfall, had risen and now completely engulfed the cave opening, trapping the 6 cavers inside. The shock and fear must have been instant and absolute. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Morag ran. Her first destination was Gill House Farm, just 3/4 of a mile away. But it was abandoned. Without pausing, she pushed forward, running the 1.5 miles to Yarnberry, finally reaching Mr. Riley, who drove her down to make the emergency call. At exactly 11:10 p.m., the rescue alarm was raised. Within hours, Mossdale became a battleground, not just of life and death, but of man versus nature. Over 300 people converged, cavers from all over Britain, firefighters, heavy machinery operators, JCBs, tractors, pumps, all were deployed in a desperate effort to divert the water away from the cave entrance. Throughout the night, in darkness and pouring rain, they worked, digging a trench 6 feet deep and 6 feet wide, stretching over 100 yards in hopes of redirecting Mossdale Beck. By midday on June 25th, enough progress had been made for rescuers to enter the system. Their first hope was Rough Chamber. Perhaps the group had retreated there to safety, but it was empty. The team pushed further, deeper, their movements hindered by residual water, silt, and collapsing passages. By 12:40 p.m., they reached a narrow tunnel called the Marathon Passage, a grueling section deep within the system. And at 5:40 p.m., they found the first of the bodies. 5 of the 6 had died together, huddled deep in the far Marathon West Passage, likely trapped and overwhelmed by a wall of water that came crashing down upon them with unthinkable force. But one was missing, John Ogden. There was hope, slim and fragile, that maybe, just maybe, he had survived, found some dry pocket, some crevice. But as the rain intensified again that evening, the search had to be postponed. On Monday, they resumed, and still no sign of John. 2 more days passed, and then on Wednesday, June 28th, Brian Borman, one of the rescuers, made a final descent. Pushing past debris and crawling over the remains of his lost friends, he saw boots and a helmet caught in a tight rift, jammed vertically. It was John. All 6 were dead. The tragedy was total, sudden, absolute. The coroner returned a verdict of misadventure. All 6 had drowned, likely swept away by a wave of water cascading down the narrow passages, leaving them no time to retreat. The rescue teams, after intense consultation, came to a difficult but unanimous decision. The bodies could not be safely retrieved. To extract them would put others at risk. The coroner and police agreed. The entrance to Mossdale Caverns was sealed with concrete. A memorial plaque was placed on the cliff above the entrance. The cave, from that day on, became a tomb. But the story doesn't end there. 3 years later, a small group of Leeds cavers, friends and colleagues of the 6, returned to Mossdale. The entrance was reopened. With permission from the families, the group carefully navigated the cave back to the far Marathon section. There, they buried the bodies of their companions in a secluded side chamber they named the Sanctuary. A memorial cairn was also raised on the moors above, directly above the place in the cave where the bodies had been found. The plaque on the cairn reads, Mossdale Memorial Cairn, over the place in the cave where the bodies were found. To this day, Mossdale Caverns remains closed to official expeditions. Entry is prohibited, but some still go. Unofficially, quietly, always knowing what waits in the darkness beneath. This was, and still is, the deadliest disaster in the history of British caving. And if it moved you, share it, speak about it, preserve it. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful, untold true stories. Leave a comment to pay tribute to those lost at Mossdale.